Let's just start here with a question that I think a lot of people will be wondering. Really solid payrolls report. The outlook is brighter. The vaccine timetable, you guys have accelerated it. Why on earth do we need a $1.9 trillion bill?
First of all, it's great to see you two. Always enjoy catching up. Look, I think we need to get under the hood of this jobs report in a second. We're always happy to see more people get more jobs. But let's take a breath here and look at the bigger picture. This job market is still down 9.5 million jobs from a year ago. That's actually 800,000 jobs worse than the lowest point of the Great Recession. We learned today that the black unemployment rate is just below 10%, 9.9%. 69,000 educator jobs down. That's 1 million over the past year. Our state and local help from the American Rescue Plan directly targets that problem. So there is a lot of economic pain out there, and that hasn't changed because of this one print, especially, by the way, a print that was driven. 90% of those gains come from the very volatile leisure and hospitality sector, a sector that a couple of months ago shed 500,000 jobs. So let's get under the hood, let's take a breath, and let's recognize that many, many Americans are still in the throes of this crisis and need the help delivered by the American Rescue Plan.
So, Jared, why do you think that argument that you've just illustrated quite perfectly is not resonating with prominent Democratic economists?
In fact, not only is it resonating with economists on both sides of the aisle, it's massively resonating with the American people, which I would argue are the most important group here, even if I'm neglecting my own profession a bit here. We're talking about approval rates for this plan that are north of 70%. I just saw a number that was 75 or 76. And bipartisan, by the way. You know this word partisanship, it means something different in Washington than in the rest of the country. This is a plan that whether you're a D or an R, you want to see the schools open. That simply doesn't happen in a timely fashion that's acceptable to this president without the American Rescue Plan. Distribution of the vaccine, getting shots in arms, as I mentioned, schools, providing checks, relief, unemployment insurance. By the way, unemployment benefits that expire in something like 11 or 12 days without the American Rescue Plan. The urgency of this plan is just as big as it was yesterday, and the American people know that.
Jared, let's pick up on that, because in many ways, yes, that is true, but also you are stating the obvious. If I was getting sent a $1,400 check by you and I was surveyed, I'd be approving it as well. No wonder there is a high approval rate. On The Economist, on the Democratic Economist, Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary, raising questions about this. Olivier Blanchard raising questions about this. And I've had economist after economist on this program with me raising the very same questions. Did their views not matter? No, let me just finish the question, Jared. Let me just finish the question quickly. You've said the electorate matters, and of course they approve this. If you've lost the argument in financial circles and in markets, does that matter at all?
Well, first of all, the objection from Larry, for example, who is a good old friend of mine to whom I try to catch up with as often as I can. We disagree on this heating point. If you read what Larry is saying at all carefully, he is absolutely agreeing of the need for relief, the need to finally hit this virus with the knockout punch that has heretofore eluded it, and finally get us to the other side of this crisis so we can launch a robust, reliable, and racially inclusive recovery. So there is definitely arguments about this heating question, and that has a lot to do more with the size of the output gap and the speed of the spend out and whether people are going to save or spend, and those are nuanced arguments that I'm happy to get into. But in fact, you know, there are very few economists who disagree with the need for this plan. There's argument around the edges. Now, you said a second ago, you know, the people like it. Well, sometimes if the public, you know, north of 70% approve of a plan, that actually means it's a good plan. You don't have to overthink it, especially at a period where we're 9.5 million jobs down from where we were a year ago. If you were telling me we're at full employment, we'd be having a much different discussion. The black unemployment rate is almost 10%. So the urgency of this plan is recognized by the American people in a way that we should pay attention to.
Jared, there's a need for relief. Everyone agrees with that. I don't disagree with you. I'm not here to advocate a separate argument. It's about the composition of this plan. And more importantly, for a lot of people, it's about the size, and you know that, and the size is absolutely massive. Secretary Summers, who comes on Bloomberg, has talked about this repeatedly as well. The worry, as you know, is this takes all the oxygen out of the room to secure an infrastructure plan down the road, to secure public investment, and you'll be overwhelmed if we do overheat. What gives you the confidence? What gives you the confidence that we won't overheat, that this isn't big enough?
Great question. So I'm going to get to that. Let me just first, though, address this targeting point. There are elements of this plan that reduce child poverty by 50%. That would be a massive success at a time when low-income families, many of whom are essential workers, are under tremendous pressure. This plan targets state and local governments that, as I just told you, have shed 1.4 million jobs, 1 million of those jobs in education. Now, heating versus overheating. Let me be very clear. Nobody is saying that the risks of economic heat are zero. In fact, we've already seen, and you've reported, on some of the heat that's generated by expectation of this plan. Heat that I, by the way, would consider vitally important to an economy that's experienced much more deflation than inflation in recent years. Why am I confident against overheating? Well, for one, the output gap is much larger than many economists assume it is. And if you look at some of the work, say, from Goldman Sachs, you'll find an output gap that's twice as large as some of the sort of inflationistas are saying. Secondly, the spend out is considerably slower than some folks believe. That is, according to the Congressional Budget Office, this does not spend out in 1 year, it spends out in 2 years. And that's important, both in terms of making sure the fiscal impulse is lasting and and putting down overheating risks. Now, to be very clear about this, people will start getting checks very quickly. Yep. People will get unemployment insurance benefits very quickly. But some of the longer-term parts of the plan spend out more slowly. Finally, some folks are going to initially save some of these resources. That translates into a lower multiplier and less inflation. Is that a problem? No, I think it's actually a feature, not a bug, because in times of great pandemic-induced uncertainty, families who usually have negative or low or zero savings rates need that kind of a cushion to help deal with the air pockets that they face over the terms of this crisis.
Jared, that final point there is the difference between relief and stimulus, what those checks get used for. And you and I have spoken before, and you've said it's relief and it's not stimulus. So help me understand this just a little bit better. How do you calibrate who those checks go to based on where the need is and what the money is used for? And why do you come up with a number at, say, $75,000?
Yeah. So first of all, I think listeners may sometimes reasonably be confused. What do you mean relief? What do you mean stimulus? Well, so oftentimes stimulus is designed to get people back into the labor force as quickly as possible, to spend out and have higher multipliers on the kinds of resources that we're providing. And definitely a lot of that will happen. Our anti-eviction resources in the rescue plan get to people right away and help them cut down some of that debt that they've been accumulating from rent. But others we've found, when we've seen past examples of this, initially save these resources because they can't go out and spend them as quickly as they want. And then when they hit an air pocket in their personal economies, that's when they spend. So having this cushion, this relief cushion, is essential to them. In terms of the targeting of the checks, Congress recently ratcheted down the high end of the phase out of those checks so they phase out sooner. But there's no question, if you actually look at the kinds of burdens that people face, if you look at some of the low savings rates that they went into, that a single family with $75K is facing hardship in this economy, and they need those direct income payments just as much as some of the well-targeted, just as much as some of the more directly targeted to the poor payments that I mentioned a minute ago, helping to cut child poverty by 50%.
Jared, I hear you're fighting for this, and I know you're passionate about it. What I don't hear is the same passion and fight around a higher minimum wage. And many people might sit here and ask the question, why aren't you fighting hard enough for it? Why don't you fight harder? Why aren't you negotiating? Why aren't you willing to give something up to secure it? What's happening?
You know, now that you've raised the minimum wage, let me tell you that I have been fighting for that policy for my whole career, which lasts too many decades for me to get into. And the President of the United States, far more importantly than me, has been fighting for this ever since the campaign, and I want to tell you right here on Bloomberg TV that he is not going to stop fighting for that. He is committed to a $15 an hour minimum wage, phasing in over a few years. He's going to continue to fight for that, and the people who say that that's somehow unrelated to what's going on in the country, I think are just missing the boat. You've got millions of low-paid essential workers working away, toiling away at a minimum wage that's set at $7.25 an hour.
Yep.
Now, if anybody who can hear my voice thinks that's an adequate wage floor, you've got an argument with myself and the President of the United States, because we believe that minimum wage should be raised. We need to figure out how to get from here to there, and trust me, that is going to be an ongoing focus of this White House.
Let's finish there on that road. Last time around, there was a willingness to drop taxes on companies to phase this in. Can we do that again?
You know, this is neither the time nor place for that negotiation, but you are right that historically those kinds of things have been paired. I think there are many variations that we're going to have to work with Congress to get from here to there.
I understand you won't negotiate with me. Are you willing to negotiate with them on that point, and are you?
I'm really here for the economic analysis. The negotiators are a different group of people. What I'm here to tell you is that this nation can get to $15 an hour in a phase-out range and provide much-needed relief to people. It's a simple plan that has the intended consequences of raising the pay of low-wage workers without having distortionary effects on the other side. So full speed ahead on the minimum wage.